Today I am joined by my friend Caleb Henze. He's a chemistry student, a tactical thinker, and proof that you can love both math and RPGs. I've had the pleasure of playing with Caleb both at the table as well as online. He's currently right now, I believe you are still deep in a Star Wars campaign?
Not Star Wars. This is full D&D.
Full D&D.
Yeah.
You were in a Star Wars campaign.
I was in a Star Wars campaign. I was DMing that one.
But yeah, I want to welcome you to the podcast officially.
Thank you. Pleasure being here.
I'm excited to have you on, mainly because you tend to be someone who reminds me a lot of myself in the way that I think. And so I think you're someone who I've seen that's really good at role play at the table, really good at thinking tactically, but you're also like still a critical thinker. You're not always the goofiest person, because I feel like there's like three personalities. There's more than that, but I'm oversimplifying. There's usually the person who is super quiet at the table, the person who is extremely animated and is basically a goofball the entire time.
Yeah.
And then you have the person that's in between that kind of wants to have both a meaningful story and like a meaningful arc, but also is a thinker and thinks about how their decisions affect the game. So
yeah.
I'm glad to have you on. I really want to start off and just kind of let the viewers get to know you. What initially got you into Dungeons and Dragons?
Sure. Yeah. So I got into Dungeons and Dragons when I moved to Kansas City. It was a mutual friend of ours, Bradley, introduced me to Dungeons and Dragons. He had a neighbor across the street from the house he was living at that time. I think this was 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And his neighbor was like a full-time, like he did like 3 or 4 campaigns. So he was like a dungeon master. And he ended up talking to him, and then they started up a campaign together, and Bradley invited me to that. So that was the first time I played. I started out as a wizard. Yes, my character's name was James the Wizard. He was, this was like, they still had, I think it was Tasha's Cauldron or whatever. So there was the Order of the Scribes Wizard, where you could basically make your own spells. And so it was like the perfect introduction for me, because I just full nerded out and broke every encounter by just changing the spells, damage type, and everything to ruin the DM's time. So after that, he banned that class. So that was my first introduction to Dungeons and Dragons playing. I had, when I was in high school, I started watching like a Dungeons and Dragons podcast. Ooh. So after school and after like sports and stuff, I would come home and I would start listening to that while I had food or started homework or whatever. So I guess that was technically my first introduction. And then recently it was my first time playing.
So how many years have you been playing then?
3 or 4. So what year would that have been? I think it was 2021, in the fall of 2021. It was like November or December was when the campaign started. And that one went for about a year, I think. And then as that one was wrapping up, that's when I started, I ran into the, Edge of the Empire Star Wars rule system.
Yeah.
And so then I picked that up and I started over online a campaign with my brothers, with Bradley and Bradley's brother-in-law. And we played, and I GM'd that. So that was really fun, but incredibly difficult to like do. It's just, there's so much going on when you're DMing or GMing that, yeah, it's really hard, especially in a world like Star Wars where everything's kind of laid out in a lot of ways. It's, oddly enough, it's sometimes easier to GM when you can make everything up on the spot. But with Star Wars, you're trying to like make it fit in the world. But then also the rule system is really hard because there's just so many rules for every encounter. Yeah, but that one was really fun. And then around the time that one, I started wrapping it up, life was getting busier. And then Bradley started another campaign that's still going now. It's been a year and a half since we started that campaign.
Dang, so you have a lot of lengthy campaigns.
Yes.
I'm used to seeing stories stretch out over, 12, 16, 18 months.
Yep.
Where I would say most people get in via like usually one shots, but you were like kind of pedal to the metal, like you hopped in and you like did it for an extremely long amount of time. D&D is something where it tends to be something that really hooks us, and it's all about storytelling, and that's kind of what draws me to the table.
Yeah.
What do you feel like has kept you coming back to continue to playing, like both as a GM and a player?
It's the storytelling. It really is. It's fun to interact with other people, especially in that kind of fun acting way when the stakes are so low.
Yeah.
You can like let out that little goofiness that's inside of you. You can pretend to be someone else. But you can also write a story that your friends are taking place in. So it's like when you're a kid. I don't know if you did this. Like when I was a kid, my brothers and I, we'd go outside in our backyard. We had a pretty big backyard with like garden everywhere and trees and stuff like that. So we could go out there and run around and do stuff, but we'd pretend to be whatever, like knights in the forest or whatever, we'd pretend to be in somewhere Star Warsy, wherever, we're on Endor fighting the Empire, and that's what we did as kids. And so this is kind of like bringing your friends with you into your childhood in a way, but also you have the maturity to be able to write more engaging and interesting stories and not just, I'm the best person at everything. You're like, okay, well, my character is actually really flawed. And so you get to explore, a flawed character. And there's a degree of like a psychological for me in it, where you can imagine yourself if you had made some different choices in life, or if you believe different things, and you can kind of act out what a different version of yourself would be in some ways. Obviously that only works if you make a character that's somewhat similar to yourself. And that's kind of the first character I made in many ways. And since then I've diverged into, well, let's just play let's play a dragon, or let's play a, tabaxi or whatever,
No, I think that's totally natural. I think so often I tend to think of the characters that I've played, or even sometimes the characters as a GM that I write, to be more of different iterations of myself, or maybe what I think of as a parody of someone else.
Yeah.
Like I did do a one shot where I essentially made it was a Back to the Future one shot, and essentially I made Biff Tanner as part of this Time Wizard supervillain, but essentially it was a parody on Donald Trump as a Time Wizard. But it's something like that where I think you get to be and think about different things from your own perspective, from your own personality. And then sometimes you have characters that are completely different than who you are. I wanted to ask you about this because you have kind of touched on a few different things. You being a wizard, I think that speaks a lot for your first character. I kind of joke that everyone's first class says a lot about who they are, which in my mind, I'm not going to go into what a wizard means. I think it's definitely interesting that you chose wizard.
So how close am I to Donald Trump?
Not that close. My first character was a bard, but I think that's mainly because I'm a musician, and the idea of being able to have magic, or that the music that you play actually affects the real world, is kind of cool. But I would say you talk a lot about story as a GM and as a player. Do you feel like you're the person that preps for hours on end and writes all these backstories and builds all these universes? Are you more the person who wants to make it up on the spot as long as it makes sense and kind of improvise with that in game?
Yeah. I think as far as GMing, I am really big on improvising. So I'll do a outline or something. I'll draw out some maps. I'll draw out some general kind of themes and be and write out some characters. So I'll probably prepare a list if I'm doing a session of 4 or 5 characters, and I'll squeeze them in wherever I can, and I'll introduce them to the players or whatever, but I'm not trying to force a specific storyline to happen. I'm more I'm just going to prepare the world. And that's even before I ever DM'd or played in a D&D campaign, I would do maps and draw out worlds, and then I would write a history for the map. So I'd draw 2 continents or something. Yeah. And I'd draw in the terrain and everything. And then I would put into the continent different nations, and then I write out just a few paragraphs and some ideas of these nations, just a short history or whatever. And so that is kind of how I approach dungeon mastering as well. Where I will just do really general and have a world prepared for the players to engage in. And I think that's kind of my strength with GMing, is the really strong improvising in a way that feels like it was planned or belongs. But my friend Bradley is very strong at like preparing everything in advance, writing out full, like all these different documents and everything like that, and having everything way planned out. And I definitely wish I was a bit better at that end of it, but it's just such a time investment when you start going that route. And I think I'm trying to enjoy it a lot more. And when I have to like put in that much work, it becomes a lot harder for me to actually do a session.
No, I'm the same way. I kind of call it more of the Shakespeare approach, where it's like, I think the world is a stage. And so I'm thinking I'm setting that up and then allowing the players to walk into that story or that universe. Now, I would say I tend to vary because there's things that I want planned. I don't want it to be like, I loved when players like engage with the story. In my mind, my goal is to give them clues and hints to point them in a direction. Now, obviously, you can't stop them from hoboing the entire town or running into like a tavern and just picking a random bar fight just for the sake of it. But it's one of those things where I tend to try to create a story and narrative that's happening in the world that they're in, that is happening apart from them, and then give them the option to either buy in. And then a lot of times if they're not buying in, I try to think to myself, both in the moment and off, kind of off screen, how do I get that buy-in? How do I get them invested in what I'm wanting to do? Because a lot of times if I'm throwing stuff out there and they don't care about it, it's usually like, even if I were to try to like force a story because I prepped it, if they're not interested as players, a lot of times it's going to end up being an unfun or just a boring session.
Yeah.
Like if your players love combat and love magic, maybe sitting in a, ancient temple trying to decipher some random puzzle that was designed for a third grader, but for some reason, your 20-year-old friends can't comprehend it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not the funnest time for them.
Puzzles in D&D are the hardest thing.
They are ridiculous.
There's
I feel like every puzzle needs a failsafe.
Yep.
Meaning like there's just something, honestly, I think I've been DMing for 2 years now, and my players are going to see this. I don't think there's a single puzzle they've actually ever solved.
Oh, yeah.
Because I essentially end up giving up after 45 minutes and totally just coming up for a narrative reason why, I don't know, someone broke down the door or the puzzle was magically figured out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think improv is part, to me, I think if the players are improvising characters, why wouldn't the DM be improvising the story? Now, I don't think that means you have nothing, but I think improv is kind of the heart of D&D. It's the heart of, in my mind, storytelling in a way that makes sense, in a way that captures people, and then you're able to pull inspiration from things that are constantly happening like in your day-to-day life. It's not kind of what I would have referred to as stale. I'm not saying prepping is stale. It's very easy to write a story, write an entire narrative, write an entire universe. Yeah. And then because you put all, hours of energy and work into it, you're essentially married to it. And you can't see what's wrong with it. And then, if your players hate it or they destroy it at the table, they set your entire fire. It becomes this thing where like essentially, though you have an idea, you're not able to throw the baby out because you not that you want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but like you're not able to see what's good and what you can keep because you're just so sold on that idea. Yeah.
No, that's I ran into that in a few different things when I was doing the Star Wars campaign. There was this character I wanted to have join the character's party. Mm-hmm. But the trick was they were initially hostile to the characters. Ooh. So I was like in this encounter trying to figure out how do I convince my players not to just try and kill this character, but instead follow the clues to convince the player, the character to stop fighting them and to join them instead. So I ended up being pretty heavy-handed at the end. It was like, pretty early on in the campaign and they were all pretty fresh at it. So I kind of was just like, started dropping hints. I was like, one of the characters was force sensitive. So I was like, you see a vision. Yeah. And they eventually got it. He was like, guys, I think he's trying to tell us that we should befriend this person. I'm like, thank you. But so it eventually worked, but it was very heavy handed. And so trying to do that in a subtle way, that doesn't feel like you're just railroading the players into something is definitely one of those things that you pick up and grow in as you DM more. Yeah, but even like you were saying, when you're doing traps or puzzles, having multiple ways to do it. I've seen I took place in a couple different puzzles where there was one solution, and if you didn't get the one solution, it was kind of just like mission failed, you lose, go home. and it's really frustrating, as a player and also for the DM. So I think I learned from that to whenever I'm making a puzzle, you have to kind of gauge how badly do I want the players to solve this puzzle? How badly do I want them to have the reward? And if they don't get it, what's some other way I can turn them so that way they're distracted enough to not be disappointed by the fact they didn't get that puzzle done or whatever.
Yeah.
So like in one case, there was like this locked door with the mission objective in it. They couldn't open up the locked door, but I had there was like a janitor or something like that with like a key card that could get into the thing. And if they figured it out, they could mug the janitor and unlock the door, but then they would set off the alarm. And so there was just raise the stakes, but they could still get the objective done. So yeah, that kind of stuff is really fun when you can improvise that kind of thing on your feet where you go, I have this objective I want to do. It's not guaranteed they'll take the one direct path, but I kind of have an idea for a couple different ways they could do it. And then depending on what choices they make, you can tailor your other things to fit the problem.
I typically, when I think about prepping, because I do prep, I'm definitely not saying that I don't, but typically the first thing I approach with is I want to prep as little as possible. I want to work as little as possible, and I want it to be as on the cuff and as fun as possible. Because most of the time, there is nothing that I've ever prepped or written out that I was 100% married to that went 100% to plan every time. Like, it just doesn't work. Like, players are their own people. You don't know. I think of it as like an escape room. Like, if you take different people, there's going to be a different way those people are going to approach that escape room every single time. And in my mind, if you lock your players in an escape room, some people will get it and some people won't. So typically I try to start off with like really simple ideas, like reviewing the characters, trying to figure out how I can connect them to the story that I'm wanting to tell, and then starting with a strong hook, something that is immediately like, this happens. That's a key driver. That's like the very beginning of the story. So that way it's something that is immediately grabbing their attention. Maybe there's a festival in town. Maybe there's a sinkhole that opens up in the road leading to like the depths of the city. Just something to kind of get that initial hook in. And, the players can take it or they cannot. And then I try to think of kind of like what you're saying, like outlining some scenes and ideas, but I'm not married to them and the order could change. And then I like to sprinkle in like secrets and clues and like small things that can help kind of hint at like what you're saying, like to push them. Oh, well, maybe this NPC is friendly, or maybe this NPC is not, or maybe this NPC is untrustworthy. But they're short and they're relevant. And then one of the things I try to hold to is I'll come up with maybe 15, 20 secrets or clues for each section. But they're not real, meaning they don't exist until the players find them. So it's kind of like, this is a story element that's here, maybe it's, I think like a sentence or two, but it's something that I can just kind of drop in the story to where like, because, characters like, there's so many times where I'm playing with people and they're not like, they go explore some random part of the room that you had no intention of them ever looking into. And then it's like, oh, well, they decided to, since the barkeep, went in the back to grab drinks, they decided to hop over the bar. And
so you literally have like a list of like 15, 20 things. Yeah. And then when you go, oh, actually, this is a good place to drop on, you will drop it. Oh, that's a really good idea.
And, oh, well, they decided to go behind the bar to look, and they found what looks to be like a handwritten note that leads them to maybe their next objective. And that way it's like, you're kind of having those things there. They exist in your mind, but they don't become real until the players actually find something to interact with. And then you really do get that feeling of, wow, like this is all along happening. Like Daniel's this great mastering, which I'm not. I just prep ahead of time.
And then the proper use of improvising.
Yeah. When I think about stories, my favorite stories, like
what are a couple of those?
I would say, I mean, up there is probably Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
I love Chronicles of Narnia. And then I pretty much anything that Brandon Sanderson writes to me
Yeah.
is like has been pure gold, meaning like when I read it, his prose and the way that he talks, in my mind, he's going to be the next like Tolkien-esque person for our generation.
He's already written like 3 Lord of the Rings effectively as far as like
books,
word count goes.
But I think about like what makes The Hobbit, like the original Hobbit, feel magical. Yes, it's the characters and the lore and, you know, the silly things. Like I think about Tolkien opening the book with like pipeweed and stuff. But I think a lot of it is the locations. Like when you are reading the description, and I know Tolkien goes over the top with the descriptions. So I'm not saying you should do that when you prep for Dungeons & Dragons. But when you think of these, what I call like fantastic locations, they're center points for the story that tend to draw people in. They tend to really define the feeling of the story that you're going on. And they provide, in my mind, kind of like stepping stones for the hero's journey. So, and it's like we've got these little key places, and they don't always have to be in every session. Like sometimes, like I've spent an entire session in a tavern because that's just what it was. Like it was a murder mystery, and that's where they were. But having some key places like just planned out, and typically I try to think of ones that they're universal, in the sense of, you know, maybe the characters are on their way to X location, then I can keep kind of navigation and traveling interesting by having something to sprinkle in where it's like they're going to this place and they run upon like the lost ruins of like Corinthal, and you just come up with this random idea and it feels very on the spot, but it's not. And then you have essentially maybe a 2-sentence description of what that place looks like, that is thought out and is alluring to them and kind of draws them in. And then you have, you know, if you've already prepped some of those secrets and clues, you have something to drop in to lead them to the next point of the story.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I like that. I'm going to steal that probably next time I DM, because that's a genius idea. I've always had like pre-planned, like there was like different connections and stuff where if, like I know 2 of my brothers they love Star Wars as much as I do. So I wrote out a few things where I had pre-planned, like there was like different like data pad messages or things you could find or different symbols that I had sprinkled intentionally in the world, specifically so that they would recognize them. And then one of my other friends, like Bradley's, he loves like a lot of like Jedi lore and different like lore on the Sith and different stuff like that. So I had tailored some things for him. But I think the idea of just having a list pre-prepared that you can sprinkle anywhere that you like is like, that's such a fresh way to keep someone engaged, especially if you're tailing each one to the different players, you know?
And then typically what I do is for each session, I come out with a new list. Sometimes things transfer over. Like maybe I'll keep things that I didn't use in the previous session, but sometimes based on the player's choices, because in my mind, because that's the only place where my thoughts take place. I want the choices of the players to have the biggest effect on the story. So they're going to make choices that will make certain clues or secrets not really relevant.
Yeah.
But the more choices they make, the more the story kind of unravels, the more ideas that I can come up. And so it's kind of like riffing off of their choices and trying to figure out how can I tell the story in a way that feels connected to what they've already decided and what they're about to decide, but also feels like it was already there. Because I think that's the thing, is like you want it to feel like this stuff is existing outside of the story, outside of them, so that when they just happen to stumble upon it, it feels authentic, it feels real, and it has like a lot of meaning.
Yeah.
Right now, you're not in a Star Wars campaign anymore.
No.
You're in a basic D&D campaign.
Yep.
Are you GMing that campaign?
No, I'm a player.
You're a player.
Yes.
What class are you playing in? Can you tell me a little bit about your player?
Okay. In this campaign, I am playing a Tabaxi monk.
Ooh.
This is the hardest character I've played because I have 20 wisdom and 8 intelligence. I have a hard time trying to figure out how to play like an 8 intelligence character,
Yeah.
especially with the group I'm playing with, because when you run into an encounter, and there's an obvious solution to the encounter, but none of them see it. And you're like, I want to say the answer, but my character wouldn't recognize it.
No.
Or whatever.
True.
And it's not because they're not smart. It's because, well, two of them are like fresh to D&D.
Yeah.
And the other one is just like not a details person. And so it's like impossible. It's like you have a group of just 3 entirely different people, and there's like 2 of them just want to go and fight people, and the other one's like, I just want to talk to this random hobbit at the bar in the inn, and I don't care about anything else. And so for me, as like I'm a very task and goal oriented person, I'm like, I am thinking of the objective. I'm like, I want to get the objective done, and so having to do that in the bounds of the character I made is very difficult. But you asked how the character. It's a Tabaxi monk. So kind of the idea for me was I wanted to play a character. Well, it was also part of it was I was like trying to fit the group a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, because we had like a rogue, a warlock, and a ranger. And so I'm like, well, okay, I'll try and play something a little bit more tanky. And so I picked monk, obviously, because you got, high defenses and whatnot.
Yeah.
Like that. But I also wanted something where there's a little bit more of that mystical nature, and you can be a bit more involved in the role play aspects of different things, and not just like I hit things with stick until it dies, which ironically is exactly how monk plays in every encounter.
Basically. But outside of it's more of like I take my staff and it's more, it feels better, more educated, more whimsical than just me Gronk, me destroy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that has been fun outside is like the monk has a lot of ways of breaking dice rolling where there's like, oh, there's this thing I want to climb up, and I'm like, I run up the wall. Whereas like other classes are like, I got to climb, or a wizard who could fly maybe. But so that's been somewhat fun to like trivialize some of those encounters to get to the real more meaty encounters that are more meaningful. But also I think it kind of makes a few different things cheaper. There's like, oh, there's like a wall, like a pit trap or something like that. It's like, well, I just walk around it, which is tricky when you're playing a monk and you can break so many rules to not make your DM mad at you.
Yeah.
But what I've found really fun is trying to play the more mystical side of being a monk, where it's like, if you're a monk, you're supposed to be some kind of philosopher, in a lot of ways. And so trying to play a wise philosopher, but not in a way that's like super intellectual, is an interesting challenge, And I've kind of approached it from the side of like, this is a character who wants to help other people do things and has been given a lot of practical knowledge on the side of like observing people living their lives and doing different things like that. And so he can give that information to the other players to help them in their encounters, or use that in your role-playing aspect. So
did you write the entire backstory? Like, is it something that you super fleshed out, or did you kind of more wing it in the sense of like, I'm just going to kind of pick an idea and then roll with it at the table?
I started doing a fleshed out backstory, and then I saw what the other characters were doing and then winged it. Because when you have 2 joke characters already in the campaign, and one of them played by the goofiest person and like the only other serious character is played by the goofiest person, you're like, okay, well, if I play a serious character, it's not going to go very well. In that, like, it's just not going to mesh with the rest of the party. And so I was like, oh, we'll be a little bit goofy. So I based this character off of Tai Lung from Kung Fu Panda.
Oh my God.
But it's like, what if Tai Lung was good?
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And that's my character, basically.
Oh, that's amazing.
So he's super high opinion of himself, thinks he's the greatest thing of all time, like worships a dragon, and different stuff like that. And is like, this dragon is the greatest, and I am his greatest disciple, and different stuff like that. So gotten a few fist fights over that.
Oh my Lord. So your players, I swear, they're not going to know about this.
Yeah.
And you might not have it, but what is your character's biggest secret right now? What does nobody at the table know?
Oh, gosh. It's a funny thing. It's been 6 weeks since we had a session, so I haven't even thought about any of this for a while.
Are you still playing?
I'm trying to remember. I don't know if there's a whole lot of secrets he has right now. Maybe one of them. I don't know if the other characters know this. My character got captured by dark elves and went through the Underdark, and so has some like Underdark connections. And also, this is maybe the biggest one. My character has connections to like a spy ring, an international spy ring.
So is he really like good, or is he not? Then okay,
He thinks he's good.
he thinks he's okay.
And he's not smart enough to realize otherwise.
So you're getting a chemistry degree,
Oh yes,
and you're doing tabletop gaming.
yes.
Where do you find the time for both?
Well, thankfully, I'm not DMing, so I don't have to spend a lot of time on the tabletop thing. And other than that, we do every other week right now. So it's like three or 4 hours every Sunday,
Oh wow.
or every other Sunday, I mean. So it's not too demanding. Like, it's a big time chunk, but it definitely is like I cram homework the weeks there's a campaign or whatever, because I want to make sure I have time for that. So it is what it is. Also, like, sometimes, you're in the middle of the campaign and there's some scene that's you're not involved in, and you just knock out a few homework problems or whatever while you're waiting. Yeah. But if I was trying to DM right now, that would be impossible. I had a friend ask me if I could DM another campaign. So there's I don't know if you saw this. There's Stormlight.
Yes.
Rule set that's
I
coming
had
out.
The same friend reach out to me about this campaign.
Yeah, so he asked me to DM it, and I'm like, man, that would be so much fun, but I can't right now.
I haven't read the full books yet.
Yeah, I just read through the entire PDF. I was like, oh, it's pretty cool.
I told him, I was like, I've started the Stormlight Archive, and it's probably, I mean, I've read the Mistborn trilogy, and I've read a few of Brandon Sanderson's like one-off books, but I always start The Way of Kings and like read a few chapters, and then I'm holding this massive tome of a book, and I'm like intimidated by how large it is, and I'm like, how am I going to finish this in my free time?
Yeah.
And so I told him, I was like, I would love to join them, but I would need to finish those books.
Yeah.
Because there's
how many? I think there's 5.
5.
Yeah, there's 5. And there's a bunch of additional books as well. Have you read at least the first one?
No, I've not read all of
You
it.
haven't read any of them.
But I know it all takes place in the same universe. So I know all of his books are kind of like connected because he's like...
Not all the books. It's a bit complicated. He has like a few different universes.
Yeah.
But most of them are in the same universe. So I think he has like 4 series that are in different universes.
Yeah.
Than this one. Than his Cosmere or whatever he calls it. Yeah, Cosmere.
So I've seen it. I had kind of like, because when I was just starting to play, I had just finished the Mistborn trilogy. And in fact, I've made a homebrew class that is on the internet that is of a Mistborn class up to about level 15, because writing a class up to level 20 is ridiculous. And who plays games at level 20? But I was like, I want to play this game, but I cannot read these 5 books in any like consistent time period to be able to be prepared to hop in.
Yeah. I think it took me... I finished the 5th book. The 5th book came out last winter, and
That thing's huge.
I wrote that. I mean, it was his biggest book that he's ever written. I think I finished it in a month or something like that. But I didn't have a whole lot to do, and it was winter, so it was like free time. It was like, well, just read the book. I think it took me like 2 years to read through, because I first started our mutual. He introduced me to Mistborn first. So I read the books in the order Brendan wrote them for the most part.
Oh, wow.
So I read Elantris, which was the first book he read, and then I read like Warbreaker, and then I read through the Mistborn trilogy. And then, have you read the Mistborn?
Yes.
Yeah. And then I read through, and then instead of going on to Stormlight, because Stormlight 1 came out at that time, I read the Wax and Wane series. So then after reading those, I went into the Stormlight, which is fun because there's a lot of cross references.
Yeah.
And so it was really fun to go into Stormlight having read all of those ones, because he had read in order they were released, like in the order they came out. So he didn't go into Stormlight knowing what happened in the Wax and Wayne trilogy and stuff in those characters. So I think you'll have fun when you actually do it in the Stormlight and you go, oh, I know who this person is.
I struggle with like trilogies because for me, it's like I want to complete it within a timely manner, but I'll tend to get not maybe during a book, but I'll start book one, and then life will come up, or someone else recommends a great book, and then I never get to book two, and I feel like I don't know the end of the story, and I'm a bit of a completionist. So for me, it's really hard to like have things end on like a cliffhanger and not be able to continue things on, and so it's really hard for me to commit to long stories. I don't think I have the time, but I'm trying to get more into audiobooks because it's the way of the world these days. But I'm like,
don't give in.
I know.
I started going more and more to paper books, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
See, I am traditionally like all about paper books. I love reading. I feel like it helps me with the way that I play D&D, and it helps. I think reading is something that keeps me inspired and keeps me like engaged with kind of that creative part of my mind that is longing to really delve into imagination. But it's just easier to put a book on. So it's kind of like right now, it's weird. I'm trying to do both where I read a paper book and I'm listening to an audiobook. But I tend to have more time for the audiobook. What would you say is your favorite book? And what are you reading right now?
Ooh. My favorite book. That's too hard for me to answer.
I know, it's a loaded question. It's like asking someone, what's your favorite? Sick.
Yeah, there's so many options for favorite books. I'm trying to think of different, because it goes by author, it goes by whatever. Here's a book I'll throw out there. That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis is the third book in his space trilogy.
Ooh, yes, I want to get into it, but I'm nerdy, so I keep looking for like old paperback versions of it because I don't want the Amazon like re-released.
Yeah. Well,
thing.
Yeah, good luck. I don't know if they even have those anymore, but it'll be really fun. If you do find one, I will borrow them for sure. So the Space Trilogy it's the most unique trilogy I think I've ever read in that each of the books is very different from the other one. So the first one will very much remind you of Narnia. And then the second one is like, it's like you're reading, like one of C.S. Lewis's theological books in some ways. It's like, The Great Divorce or whatever, And then the last book, which is 3 times the size of the other two, is just like all of it put together. And it's probably one of my favorite books because it's such a dense theological book framed in a nonfiction format. And even like just like a genius storytelling format that combines in a lot of the things in the themes he uses in Narnia. There's a lot of themes that Tolkien uses at different stuff like that. Yeah. And it's all just woven into this book that's deeply theological and philosophical. And when I first read it when I was like 12, I think, and I didn't understand half the things in the book then, and I've read it 3 times since then. And every time I read it, like there's new things that jump out at me. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. So would highly recommend.
What are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now? Actually, I just picked up and finished reading one of Brandon Sanderson's series. What's it even called? His Steelheart series, I think is what it's called. Yeah. It's like his superhero type series. And those are fun books. The writing is not on the level of Mistborn or Stormlight, but they're like...
I think it's more YA focused.
Yeah, probably. But they're like fun take on the superhero genre. And they were like fun read. A lot of like little puzzles in there and different things like that, but it wasn't anything too crazy. And they're kind of short, so that was just a quick read. Other books I'm reading, I had picked up Lord of the Rings again. I usually read it like once every other year, more or less, and I've been working on it here and there. Where like, in between different books, I'll just pick it up and read a couple chapters or whatever. I've read Lord of the Rings so many times now that I don't need to be reading it, if that makes sense. I know exactly what's going to happen. And mostly I read it to find inspiration. Like if I'm writing something or whatever, to just like try and like grease the creative, stuff and to try and get my brain to work more along the lines of a writer or to pick up different things. It's like, okay, how did Tolkien write this kind of dialogue, or how did Tolkien, do descriptions? And then I'd like read it and be like, oh, okay, I'll learn some new things from that and try and apply it a little bit, I'm trying to think if I'm actually reading anything right now. I will say there's this one called what's it called? The Kingdom of Cain, finding beauty in the literature of darkness, or something like that. It's fascinating. It's very enjoyable as like a conversation on different like works of art in media and different stuff like that, and stories that especially here in like the States, in like a Christian context, there's things like, D&D, there's so many things that are like, oh, these aren't okay for you to like delve into or whatever. These are like too dark 100%. Or whatever, And so he really is like delving kind of into that side of things, of saying like, what if there was beauty in every story, and like trying to like take apart like how to live with a worldview where even when something is like dark and tragic, to like look for the hope in it, and that is as much applied to like the national media as it is to everything else. Yeah. So here it is. That's the cover. It's a bit crazy.
Ooh, that looks super cool.
Yeah. Anyways,
right now I'm reading a book. It's not a family friendly book, but it's called The Black Tongue Thief. And I tend to get into books that are like, I call them one shots, but essentially it's a book. It's a standalone. It's all by itself.
Yeah.
Mainly because I like having sometimes an encapsulating story. But what would you feel like is, in your mind, the heart of storytelling, and what is kind of that driving force behind the way that you tell stories?
Well, I don't even know how to answer that question. I guess that's what the podcast is for. Yeah, I think for me with stories, what I find engaging, and the thing that engages me in it, is when it touches my own experience, or it touches on like the human experience in general. I think that's really the kind of the heart of it, is if a story can grab you in a way and engage you in something and make you in a way where you are referencing the story to your own lived experiences and stuff, and it's kind of guiding you through different things. Like, I've processed a lot of the world through stories I've read.
Yeah.
And even just a lot of different events that have happened to me. It's been through books and through reading, more so than through like talking to people, that I've processed those, especially when I was like a kid and stuff. I spent a lot of time processing stuff through reading books. And so that's kind of what I look for in a story, is something that will grip me in a way that is not, where it doesn't like breed despair, but instead is like, it forces me to have a conversation with myself. Definitely. In a way that helps me grow.
Yeah.
I always read books and stories as like, there's a part of my brain, there's like a lot of me that's like, I'm just here to like enjoy myself and like distract myself for a little bit, but also like, what can I learn from this story to apply to my own life to like help me grow into a better person? That didn't really answer your question, but
no, I mean, I think it definitely touches on it. I think for me, stories are the way very much that I process life, very way that I process the real world. And so when it comes to like bringing that to the table, bringing it to the way that I would maybe DM, I think about how can I maybe touch on things that in my personal life I don't necessarily am going to spend hours talking about because I'm not sure where I'm at on it. But when I'm at the table, I can bring these ideas into a story that makes sense, that has meaning, and I can kind of explore the intricacies of that at the table and really, in my mind, express things and delve into things that I might not in my personal life.
Yeah.
Because it's easier for me to go with a story, to go with an idea, to tell something. And I think that's kind of what you're hitting on a little bit. It's part of the human experience. And I think telling stories is part of that.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm talking about in the ebook that I'm wanting to launch with the podcast is the idea of telling stories that matter, telling stories that have meaning, because telling stories is about who we are as humans. Like, all of the oral histories that have been passed down throughout civilization were all originally, before they got written down, told around a campfire, passed from generation to generation, and so on and so on. And those stories were part of how we connected, how we discussed and dealt with morality and real things. And I look at even, you know, when it comes to Judaism and the biblical accounts, like those stories were all written down. Our first histories were stories. And so we just don't do that anymore. And that's why I love D&D, because that storytelling experience that we get to go together, that storytelling experience of engaging that part of what I think is maybe part of like the primordial human, so to speak, like innate to the human condition and the way that we essentially are made and function to design. I think that part of us gets unlocked when we play games like Dungeons and Dragons, when we play RPGs, whether it's, you know, in the Star Wars universe or the Tolkien universe. I think it's part of how we connect to each other.
Yeah.
So I'll maybe ask you before we wrap up, maybe an easier question than the last one that I gave you, but what would be advice that you would give to newer players, people that are just trying to get into D&D and are trying to really get into this hobby, for just basic tips, basic advice?
Yeah. I think probably the main one is don't be afraid to be embarrassed. And also like in general, just don't be embarrassed, you know?
Yeah.
Just be goofy.
Be weird.
Let yourself be weird for a little bit. It's definitely awkward at first, especially if you've never done like any acting or theater or anything like that in your life or whatever. But it's, the more relaxed you are, or the more relaxed you can be going into D&D, into a session, the more fun you're going to have and the more fun everyone else is going to have with you. So yeah, it's just, you know, do what you got to do to be a little bit relaxed going into it, I would say.
Yeah. Do the weird voice.
Do the weird voice.
Act
Absolutely.
funny at the table. Tell jokes.
Also, I realized that my advice is don't do drugs, kids.
So I want to make this clear. I'm enthralled that you were able to come, Caleb, and be on the podcast, not just for taking outside, you know, time outside of your chemistry prep, because I know that you're basically a full-time student right now. But I think you showed us that some of the smartest players, both intellectually and strategically, are some of the funnest ones at the table. And I think we play D&D because it lets us be curious. It lets us adventure out into something, and it rewards creative thinking and wild ideas, whether it's at the table, whether it's pulling stuff in from books. Yeah. And so I want to thank you for hanging out with me today and just nerding out.
Absolutely. It's been